Life is strange, is it not? One moment we are drifting along, lost in this dream, be it a good dream or a nightmare. The next moment we are awake and discover the reality of our existence. For me, my awakening took my life. In order for you to understand this correctly, let me start my tale from the beginning. I could hear the cars zooming past on the bridge above me, the distant cursing of irritated motorists as they impatiently tried to get to their destination. The smell of urine and alcohol was ever present in this underpass that I called home. I did not have much, nor was I interested in anything. I used to be someone. I had a life that seemed as though it was a distant memory now. A wife and children that I have not seen in years. A career that I once enjoyed. I used to be happy. I can recount the moment that it all started to go downhill. Or maybe it was always in decline. I was just too content to see it. Maybe if I told her I loved her more, hugged and kissed my kids more. Maybe if I was a better husband and father, maybe they would still be here. Sometimes I can't tell if I am crazy or not, for I swear I feel her hand running through my hair as I sleep. I open my eyes and see her. Her ebony skin, flawless as always. Her hair like black silk, only finer. Eyes so deep that one can't help but to get lost in them. Losing her was like taking the heart out of my chest, the air from my lungs. Some nights, I swear, I can feel my oldest daughter sleeping on my chest, like she so often did. Could hear my youngest girl calling out for me, and the soft laughter of my son as he lay in his crib. Am I crazy because I can still see them as if they were here right now? I can see them as if in a memory that I was stuck behind a veil, a glass that prevented me from touching them. No matter how loud I shouted, how hard I cried, or how desperately I banged on the glass, they could not hear me. They could not see me. You can never understand the torture I have endured just thinking about them. My wife was my heart, my kids my soul. Now, here I lay, a heartless, soulless shell. A cadaver. I am more dead than alive. I have contemplated taking my life and joining them, but I was always too cowardly to do so. But not tonight. Tonight, I am hanging in this underpass. The rope is already around my neck. It seems as I get closer to death, that veil, that impenetrable glass begins to crack. I am coming, my love. Daddy will be home soon. I turn and look one last time at the night sky. I'm not going to miss living, for there is no life for me without them. I push the rock that is my last anchor in life from beneath my feet. The rope goes taut. I wonder when they find my body if they will see this smile on my face. The veil fades away, and for the first time, I can see them so clearly. I can feel my heart racing. I can feel it beating desperately in my throat. My head feels swollen. I am choking. I can feel myself dying. My eyes feel as if they are going to explode. The glass that kept them from me shattered. My wife looked up from the children and looked at me. She looked right in my eyes. I could not physically cry, but my soul was weeping. Tears ran down her beautiful ebony cheeks. Her tears looked like pearls as they slowly fell from her eyes. There was no joy in her eyes at seeing me. She shook her beautiful head. I could not hear her voice, but what she said was heard so loudly it was deafening.
No, not like this. It's not your time, love. Please go back.
If my heart could break any more, it would have. It felt like I was kicked in my gut. My children turned to me. "Not yet, Daddy," my oldest said. I did not know what to do or say. I wanted to touch them one more time, to tell them how much I loved them. Instead of the joy I expected to see, I was greeted with sadness. I started to fall. I don't know where I was falling. I was just falling. I did not care. All I could see was the look on her face. I felt something on my face, something on my body. I did not want to open my eyes and find myself alive, to see the underpass above me. I took a deep, painful breath. My throat hurt.
Is this him?
I heard a woman's voice say. I sighed and opened my eyes, expecting to see paramedics or a police officer. Instead, I was looking at a night sky that looked strange. The underpass was gone. I was laying on the grass. I wanted to sit up, but it hurt to try. So I looked around and saw a large woman standing by a fire. She was not fat large, she was muscled and tall, her skin a light brown, hair in a long black braid that fell down her back. She wore armour, actual armour that you would expect to see in some medieval movie. Her armour was regal, well kept, and looked as if it belonged to someone of station or position. I blinked my eyes, thinking, I'm hallucinating. Slowly I sat up and took a better look around. It seemed I was in some woods somewhere. The trees were huge and ancient-looking, their barks gnarled and twisted in a grotesque manner I have never seen before. It almost looked like the tree was screaming in agony. It gave me chills. Where the hell was I? The woman turned around, her armour making a scraping sound as she did. Her face surprised me. She was not beautiful, nor was she ugly. She was easy to look upon. Her nose was broad and lips full. Her eyes were a deep green that seemed to glow with a life all of its own.
Glad to see you are awake, Chosen.
Her voice was strangely soft for a woman of her size and build. I was expecting something deeper and masculine. She knelt down beside me and looked me over as if she were judging me.
Where am I?
I asked. She did not answer right away. She seemed to be deep in thought. For the first time, the symbol on her armour and shield was visible. It was something I recognised because it was the symbol of my community project. I was a bit confused. It was a crescent moon and star with a man sitting at the base of the moon, looking up at the star, his hands up in supplication or prayer. This was set upon a midnight blue backdrop. She saw me staring at the symbol.
You are in Darhaven, Chosen.
She finally replied. The confusion just kept getting deeper. Am I mad? Did I actually die and I am in some in-between world?
I can tell you are confused, Chosen.
She paused.
Come sit by the fire and warm yourself.
She helped me up and led me to a cushioned spot she had prepared for me. I saw 3 blankets lying next to the fire. I assumed one was for me. It was clear one was for her. But who was the third one for? The heat of the fire felt good upon my skin. I did not know how cold I was until I felt the warmth of the flames wash over me. Was I in shock? The woman walked to the other side of the fire and stood with her arms folded across her chest.
We have been waiting for thousands of years, Chosen.
She paused a moment. I could see the excitement in her eyes as she looked at me. It was the same reverence and awe-inspired look you would give a great man of power you respected. But somehow, it was deeper. It was filled with religious fervour and zeal, like I was some ordained holy man that she worshipped all her life, and suddenly he is here before her. She took a deep breath.
I am the Order of the Chosen. I have trained my whole life to guard and protect you. It was not known when you would come again to Darhaven. So we have been training for centuries and passing down the knowledge of the Chosen to every initiate. We were once the greatest army to ever be formed on Darhaven.
She paused again, as if thinking about the glory of days of old. Her expression looked saddened, almost heartbroken.
So many years passed, Chosen. So many centuries without a sign or anything from you. People lost faith. Our once great order fell apart, and all that is left is an old ruin of our former greatness and a few knights that are barely hanging on to the old ways.
She looked at me, fighting tears in her eyes.
Where have you been, Chosen?
She asked. Her gaze was penetrating. I could not turn away even if I wanted to. This seemed personal to her. Beyond the reverence of someone she was taught to worship. This was almost like she had suffered greatly because of her faith. I did not know what to tell her. I honestly had no clue what she was talking about. I'm still not sure where the hell I am, let alone if I am alive.
How do you know that I'm this chosen one? And what makes you so sure that I am him?
I asked. She took a deep breath. The armor on her broad shoulders creaked.
His skin will be the color of wet sand, his eyes black like a night void of stars. He will fall from the heavens, dead only to awaken when touched by one of his order. The trees will wither in the hall of the gods. All will know him by his symbol.
She recited and pointed at the symbol on her chest. My symbol, the symbol of Alki-Bulon. She turned her head to the sky and pointed. Far off in the distance I could see a star shining brightly in the night sky. That shining star was my symbol. Anyone who looked up at the sky could see it. Suddenly, a man stumbled out from the trees. He was bleeding heavily from a deep wound in his side. His face looked pale, and blood coated his hands. He leaned on his sword like it was a cane. The blade was black and gleamed eerily in the firelight. He looked at me and smiled. He fell to his knees.
Finally, my Lord Chosen, you have come.
The look of joy and peace in his eyes startled me. He looked as if all the pain and doubt he had was erased, like he could die knowing his faith was confirmed. The big woman rushed to his side.
Elder Ahmed,
She said as she caught him before he fell face first in the dirt. She held him in her arms.
Muazma, daughter of giants, and knight of the Order of the Chosen. You must do your duty. The enemies of our Lord are not far behind me. Protect him, and get him to the ruins of Alki-Bulon.
Elder Ahmed gasped. His voice was barely audible. You could see Muazama's heart breaking in her eyes. He squeezed her hand and looked up at me.
I am sorry if I have failed you in any way, or that I ever doubted you.
He gasped painfully. I did not know what to do or say. A light above me started to glow brightly. I looked up, and it was my symbol. The light covered him. It was so bright that it was blinding. As suddenly as it came, it vanished. When our eyes adjusted to the darkness, he was gone. Muazama sighed heavily and grabbed her sword and shield. She faced the trees, waiting. My heart raced. I could hear people marching through the woods. I grabbed Elder Ahmed's sword. It felt surprisingly light in my hand. Its black blade started to glow faintly. My whole body felt warm and light, like I was standing on air.
it seems you have been reunited with your sword.
Muazma said softly. Before I could respond, several men burst out of the woods. They were pale men, their hair varied from blonde to red. Their armour had the insignia of a burning sun on it. They saw us and stopped. A tall, hawkish man stepped forward. I could feel Muazma tense up. She gripped her sword tightly. He looked us both over. His eyes lingered on Muazma's insignia.
You are of the Order?
He asked, his voice raspy like he had a cold. Muazma did not answer.
We were following an old man who had stole something that belonged to us.
The man started, then looked at the sword in my hand.
You are carrying what belongs to us. I care not how you came by it. Just return it to me and go about your business.
He said. He shifted his stance and placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. The men behind him did the same. I looked at the sword. I did not know who it belonged to. I just know it felt right wielding it. I shook my head. Muazama smiled and slashed the man's throat. She moved with a speed that I did not think was possible. The man stood there for a moment staring at me, oblivious to the fact his throat was cut. Blood spilled down his armour and he slumped forward. By the time his men realised they were in a fight, half of them were dead. Watching Muazama fight was like watching a dance. She slashed and killed with such grace it was almost beautiful. She moved around these men like the world had slowed down and she alone was unaffected by it. The fight was over before it began. Muazama stood in the middle of several bodies, wiping the blood off her blade and shield on the men's cloak.
"We need to move, Chosen,"
she said, and pointed east.
"We are weeks, if not months away from the ruins of Al-Kibulon,"
she said, and waited for me to start moving in that direction. The chill wind echoed softly through the chilled ramparts of the great Tower of Magic. This ancient tower has stood in Darhaven for centuries. Some say it was a gift to mankind from the gods of old. Others claim it was created so man could fight off the gods and no longer be the playthings of immortals. The imagination of men knows no bounds. Elves have controlled this tower for centuries, hoarding the power and ancient wisdom here for themselves. But it was here that Lorden lay tossing and turning in his sleep. His brown brow glistened with sweat, even though snow covered the tower and the land surrounding it. Lorden clinched the sheets as he writhed in his bed. Lorden was an elder among the Magi, one who constantly warned about the prophecy. He was greatly opposed to the Chosen One and the shift in power that would come when he arrived. Lorden was the chief advisor to the king. It was whispered that Lorden ruled the kingdom, and the king was merely a puppet, a face, a distraction from reality. Suddenly, Lorden's eyes snapped open.
"He is here,"
he whispered as he sat up. His greying beard matted and tangled. He took a deep breath to calm his nerves.
"His guardian has already found him,"
he mumbled. Lorden knew their best chance of killing the Chosen and preserving their power for centuries to come was to get him before he discovered who he was. Lorden had prepared for this day. He had armies trained and ready, assassins and mercenaries on constant payroll to do his bidding. He was the heir of the king. So his power and influence in the southern kingdoms were unmatched. He, being the accomplished Magi he was, all respected him. Thus why he, a human, was a guest of honour in the ancient Tower of Magi possessed by the elves. Lorden was the most accomplished Magi in all the human kingdoms, and possibly of all the races. Lorden rose from his bed and walked to the window. Lorden was older, his age a point of many arguments in the realms in which he was known. Some said he was as old as some of the elder elves, others thought he was just in great shape for being an elder. If one knew the cost that he had paid for his magic, they would cringe away from him. All magic comes with a toll. Each toll is different. Lorden's toll was timelessness. He had been alive since the last Chosen had walked the earth, witnessed the destruction and change that was wrought in the Chosen's wake. He was just a youth then, born to the outland of the northern deserts. The dark men are what they are called now, being that their skin tone is as dark as a starless night. They were a highly intelligent warrior people, nomads who did not allow other people among them. It was rare for someone not of them to be invited to their kingdoms and cities. Lorden was never really accepted among their people and was not allowed to marry from among them. He was protected and tolerated. The pride of the people would not allow anyone that shared their blood to be mistreated. But he was a half-breed. His mother was one of the Al-Kibulon people, the people who waited on the Chosen. Al-Kibulon was the greatest city of all Darhaven, but also the most private and secretive. Some referred to the people of Al-Kibulon as a cult. But the reality was, they were just people from all over who left behind their tribes and kingdoms to serve the Chosen and be ranked among his people. They gave up their racial identities and nationalistic pride and were just known as the people of Alkebulan. It was a mixing pot. All the races were there. It was one of the few places where they all got along. There was no war among them or hate. They were all brothers with one cause. Women had all the same roles as men. There were no set gender norms or roles. The place was indeed truly a wonder, home to great armies and order. The Order of the Chosen was the fiercest army to ever walk Darhaven. They were the personal guards of the Chosen. They were few in number, but their strength, battle prowess, and heartlessness on the battlefield made their number not a factor. Many would not fight if they knew even one of the Order was facing against them. You would wonder what would make such a great and powerful city crumble, a city no army could take. It's a tale as old as time, and like all other great empires, they fell from within. Once the Chosen passed, the infighting started. They had no one to lead them. The Order of the Chosen divided up the kingdom, each declaring their own new king or false reborn Chosen. The inevitable war started. This war waged for decades. It sucked nearly all of Darhaven into it. In the end, the great kingdom of Alkebulan lay in ruins, destroyed by the very Order that was closest to the Chosen and tasked to protect him and the kingdom when he was gone. The Order of the Chosen still remained intact. Scattered remains of them who still passed down the teachings and training to future knights of the Order. But their fame and reputation long lost. They are shamed and mocked now, ridiculed and referred to as a cult with no sanity. But they are still highly dangerous, and if united with an actual Chosen, they would be near unstoppable. Lorden's mother was from these people. She was a knight of the Order. He remembered how lost she had become after the Chosen of that time had died. Her attempts to establish a normal life were pointless. Everywhere she went there was trouble, and she left destruction in her wake. Lorden's mother was a very proud and fierce believer and defender of the Chosen, like all of the Order's knights. No matter who badmouthed the Chosen, she put her sword to them. No one could beat her. So they found one of the Orders that turned mercenary hired him to kill her. The battle was legendary. 2 of the lost and few from the Order of the Chosen fought to the death. Lorden watched his mother die that day. She took her brother in the Order with her. Since then, Lorden hated and feared the Chosen. He was dreading the destruction that he would bring. Lorden feared the Chosen so much, he sacrificed his very being to creatures who dwelled in the darkest places of reality for the power and time to stop the next Chosen. Lorden shivered as he stood in the air on his balcony and looked at the night sky. The symbol of the Chosen shone brighter than the moon, announcing his arrival. Lorden held onto the stone railing and trembled not from the biting cold, but from fear.
All that doubted the reality of the Chosen will now see how real he truly is,
Lorden said into the night, and called for his guard. We walked till dawn. The silence between me and the guardian of the Chosen was clearly felt. The guardian seemed as if she wanted to speak to me about something, but kept silent. I did not know what to think. I just saw this woman with my symbol on her armour cut other sword-wielding men to pieces without breaking a sweat. If that was not enough, the landscape here was beautiful and completely foreign. I did not recognise the trees with their gnarled faces that seemed to follow me. Their expression was of awe, and like they wanted to speak. It was very unsettling.
There is a small roadside tavern not far off, Chosen. We can rest there if it suits you,
the guardian said respectfully. I nodded, not really caring. I just wanted to get off my feet. I needed to sit down and think. I am still not completely sure if this is real. I have read stories of people in comas who live a life in some dream world. Could I be in a coma? As the sun started to rise, the road we were travelling on got busy. People stared at me, and the hulking Muazama was looking intimidating in her midnight blue armour that was spotted with the men she had killed earlier. She kept her hand on her sword hilt and eyed everyone who got too close. They looked at the symbol on Muazama's armour and sneered. The hate for the Chosen and those who served him apparently was widespread and ran deep with the people.
This tavern we are going to is friendly to your order, Chosen,
Muazama whispered in my ear. We passed several more people as we neared the tavern. The closer we got, the more anxious the people seemed. Even more so after seeing Muazama. The people just gave me curious looks. I guess the way I was dressed seemed out of place here. I saw a sign ahead with a black fist painted on it.
We are here, Chosen. Stay close to me,
Muazama said. The feel of a sword on my hip was awkward and uncomfortable. I had to walk with my hand on its hilt to keep it steady so I could walk with ease. There was a crowd in front of the inn. A man in armour stood before them, blocking the entrance.
As we all know, the Order of the Chosen has been causing trouble again. These crazed lunatics are extremely dangerous and are in this tavern.
The man shouted, his voice deep and booming over the rabble of voices talking in hushed tones. As he said this, several more armoured and armed men walked from the trees with torches in their hand.
By order of His Majesty, Phalor, ruler of the southern human lands, all members of the Order of the Chosen shall be put to death. Those who support the Order shall also be killed,
the man said, and motioned for the men to set fire to the tavern known as the Clenched Fist. It has always been a friendly place for those who followed the Chosen.
Chosen,
Muazama called me urgently. I looked at her.
we must save those of our order that are in that tavern. I can't act unless you command me,
she said calmly. I nodded at her. She drew her sword and stepped forward.
Stop!
Her voice bellowed. Everyone stopped and turned towards her.
By order of the reborn Chosen, the arisen one, the undying, the immortal ruler of Darhaven, stop the persecution of his subjects or face death,
Muazama commanded. The soldiers in the crowd faced her. Many started to whisper among themselves and point at me. The soldiers with torches looked to their commander, waiting for the order to continue. The tavern door opened, dark blue robes billowed in the wind as a bold, pale man stepped from them. His eyes were a dark brown, and his beard seemed to be a tangle of thick fire. It was a deep, dark, almost blood red. He looked around, taking in all. His gaze settled on me and lingered. A huge, toothy grin took over his pale face as he seemed to recognize me. The symbol of the Chosen glowed on his robes over his heart. His grin quickly hardened to a scowl as he noticed the soldiers. With a wave of his pale hand, the torches were extinguished and the king's soldiers wielding them thrown back.
My power has returned. It truly is you, Chosen,
he said, and knelt in reverence. Leaning heavily on his staff as if something ailed him, the heavily armed commander seemed to regain his composure.
Formation!
He bellowed. His soldiers came from every direction and stood in front of him, shields up and blades drawn. Strangely, I felt calm, despite the fact that we were grossly outnumbered. I felt different. I could not explain it, but I was not afraid. My guardian stepped in front of me, her blade pointing at the commander, calling him out.
If you do not withdraw your men and return to your king, I promise you will perish this day,
she glared. The citizens of the small town seemed confused, stuck in the middle of a war they wanted no part in. I looked at them, feeling pity for them. I knew if we fought these today, this city, their city, would be destroyed. The red-bearded man walked over to stand next to Muazma, standing in front of me. He held out one of his pale hands and smiled as a ball of fire hovered above it. It was silent, smokeless fire, but menacing.
The crazed heretics of your damned lost cult have no power, and your tricks will not fool anyone,
he said, then turned to the people.
If you don't wish to see bloodshed, I advise you to leave now.
Many of the citizens did, but some stayed, their terrified eyes transfixed on me. Are you truly him? Was a silent question on their tongues. I raised my sword. Its black blade glowed deeply, consuming almost all light. I stepped forward.
I don't know who I am, or if I am this chosen. But what I do know is if you attack me here, all of you will not see tomorrow, or your families ever again. I am not here to cause destruction. I just seek answers, and those answers await me in the ruins of Akibalon.
My voice seemed to come from everywhere. A deep power emanated from me.
I am trying to spare the lives of your good men today, Commander. Don't sentence them to death this day. Return to your king and tell him what you saw. If he has further issues with me, he can find me in the ruins of Akibalon.
Many of the king's men seemed shaken, torn between their command and the reality of the chosen. The commander saw this in his men and sighed.
This is not over,
the commander said, pointing a finger at me. He glared at me, then commanded his men to leave. I felt dizzy and weak. I did not understand what had happened. I held this power for as long as I could. I watched the soldiers vanish in the distance, then fell exhausted to the dirt road.
Chosen,
the guard said, worry in her voice.
It's okay, Guardian. He is just worn out. He channeled a fraction of who he is and was not ready for it. He just needs rest,
the red-bearded man explained. Muazama nodded. Her concerned face was the last thing I saw before I plummeted into darkness. King Phalor the Fearless sat alone in his garden. He found himself here more and more. He did not know why he was drawn here, but something about the garden soothed his tired soul. For Phalor the Fearless was a warrior who was unrivaled in his prowess. His only threat in his combat dominance were the last remnants of the chosen order. He has spent a lot of his time searching for them and trying to get them to teach him their secrets. The ones he did find killed countless of his men before they were able to bring them down. It was a very expensive price he paid just to be rejected by the order he learned to despise. When people spoke of great armies, they spoke of his and his leadership, but it was always in the shadow of the great warriors and generals of the order. Phalor the Fearless clenched his fist as he stared up at the night sky. His gaze seemed stuck on the new star that no one could mistake. The symbol of the chosen light up the heavens. All of Darhaven was talking about what this meant. Many were scared, others were excited. All he knew was he had to stop them or get this chosen one to teach him the secrets of his order, to make him as powerful as one of his guardians. If the chosen wanted war, he would get it. The world was not as vulnerable as it once was. The order was all but eradicated. Only a few knights remained, and they were either in hiding or mercenaries. It's strange even the ones that became sell swords would not sell their secrets for any amount of gold. I offered one of his own kingdom and crown, and he spits in my face. The loyalty of these men was almost unnatural. All men had a breaking point. It just seemed that these knights of the chosen were unbreakable. If he, King Phalor, had but a handful of such loyal men under his command, he would be unstoppable. One of the major fallacies of ruling is being dependent on your armies and subject to ensure his rule remained intact. He could not even count how many would be rebellions or coups he had destroyed. The harsh realities of ruling and governance were something none but a king could understand. His subject lived secure and peacefully. The elves in the west stayed in their woods. The dwarfs in the southern mountains stayed in their caves. No longer did they suffer raids from any of the other races or creatures that inhabited Darhaven. They owed this peace, this security, to King Phalor. He resented the fact that they did not worship the ground he walked on for their security. He resented how they all worshipped or feared this chosen, this legend that has not been upon Darhaven for thousands of years. Yet his very symbol invoked such fear, such reverence from everyone. The greatest armies in Darhaven trembled just at the thought of facing the Chosen and his armies, despite that no one for hundreds of generations has ever seen him or fought his armies. Now, during King Phalor the Fearless rule, the Chosen has returned. Phalor the Fearless smiled up at the night sky. His black, well-oiled beard glistened in the soft light of the Chosen's symbol.
You will teach me the secrets of your power, or you will die, usurper of thrones.
Phalor the Fearless whispered to the symbol, hoping the Chosen could hear his decree. Hurried footsteps interrupted his musing. Phalor slowly turned to see one of his commanders in front of him. He kneeled and bowed his head. He looked shaken and afraid. Phalor shook his head. His black hair, thick and beaded, fell like branches of a dying tree on his shoulders. His eyes, as black as death, glowed with a fire that spoke of countless battles and countless dances with the dark maiden of death.
Sire,
the commander said, his voice shaking. Phalor could smell the fear emanating from him. Was it fear of him, or of what he had encountered? Phalor wondered. Phalor the Fearless motioned for the commander to stand.
We encountered the Chosen, sire,
the commander said as he stood. Phalor smiled.
Tell me about this Chosen,
the Fearless commanded softly.
He was powerful, my liege. His very presence was like standing in front of a living god. His voice came from everywhere when he spoke,
the commander said. His face was lit up in awe as he remembered. This angered Phalor the Fearless.
So, you failed me in your duty then, Commander,
the Fearless stated.
Sire,
the commander began, but was cut off by a quick, sharp blow to his jaw. The commander fell back and knelt. Phalor the Fearless stood in front of his commander, his blade drawn. Phalor savoured the fresh stench of fear that came from the commander. He inhaled deeply and raised his sword to end this coward.
Father,
he heard his daughter's voice. Phalor paused a moment.
Why are you not in your chambers?
He said softly. To any other than the princess, his tone would have been dangerous. Zainab knew her father was a lot of things, but his love for her trumped all else in his life. Phalor, despite his cruelty, was like any other father in this sense. His daughter held his heart and seemed to always get her way with him. It was whispered that she was the only good that ever came from King Phalor the Fearless. She maintained the balance in his kingdom. Her kindness and soft heart healed the wounds and eased the minds that her father inflicted everywhere he went. He, the great warrior, she, the water that kept the fires of her father's warrior spirit from burning them all.
There is a meeting, Father, that we have been called to. A meeting between all the kingdoms. They wish to discuss how to deal with this Chosen,
Princess Zainab said softly. She looked at her father's drawn sword and the blood dripping from the commander's lip. She touched her father's arm softly.
Come, Father. Have a meal with me and read the letter calling us to the meeting. The invoked shield,
Zainab said. She brushed strands of her long brown hair from her face. The princess was as beautiful as she was kind. Her skin was a honey brown, her eyes as dark as her father's. But where his spoke of death, hers spoke of life, Her smile was like a beacon in the night for the wounded and destitute. She was the heart of Darhaven, and he the sword. King Phalor the Fearless could face any foe. He had defeated armies with just a handful of his best men. He had never faced defeat in any battle, but he could not win against his daughter's smile. He sighed and sheathed his sword. He looked hard at his commander.
Summon the fearless ones and dispatch them to track and destroy the Chosen and his followers.
Phalor the Fearless commanded. The commander stood up quickly, placed his fist over his chest and bowed his head.
As you command, sire.